The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Valdoria Castle like secrets whispered through centuries. Captain Marcus Thornfield stood at his post beside the grand hall's towering oak doors, his polished armor reflecting the early sunlight that streamed through the stained-glass windows. 20 years of faithful service to the crown had carved lines of honor across his weathered face, and his steel-gray eyes held the unwavering dedication of a man who had never once questioned his oath of loyalty. Until today. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble corridors, each click of expensive heels against stone announcing the arrival of Lady Catherine Ashworth. Marcus straightened his already perfect posture, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the pommel of his ceremonial sword. As the newly appointed regent of Valdoria, Lady Catherine commanded respect and protocol, though her ascension to power had been met with whispered doubts throughout the kingdom. Lady Catherine emerged from the shadows of the corridor like a storm cloud gathering strength. Her emerald silk gown rustled with each calculated step, and the diamond tiara perched upon her auburn hair caught the morning light, casting tiny rainbows across the stone walls. Behind her trailed a small entourage of nervous courtiers, their faces pale and uncertain as they witnessed what would soon unfold. "Captain Thornfield," Lady Catherine's voice rang out, sharp and commanding as the crack of a whip. Her green eyes, cold as winter frost, fixed upon the loyal guard who had served the royal family since before her own arrival at court. "I require your immediate attention." Marcus bowed his head respectfully as protocol demanded. "Your ladyship, how may I serve the crown this morning?" A thin smile played across Lady Catherine's lips, though it held no warmth. She had been planning this moment for weeks, ever since the whispers had reached her ears. Whispers of doubt, of questioning glances, of guards who remembered the old ways and the previous rulers with too much fondness. Captain Marcus Thornfield represented everything she needed to crush if she was to secure her position as regent. "The kingdom faces uncertain times, Captain," Lady Catherine began, her voice carrying the weight of false concern. "Threats from within and without. In such times, absolute loyalty must be demonstrated beyond mere words or ceremonial bows." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, though he maintained his composure. In his 20 years of service, he had faced charging cavalry, siege weapons, and assassins in the dead of night. Yet something in Lady Catherine's tone made his blood run cold in a way that no physical threat ever had. "Of course, your ladyship. The royal guard stands ready to defend Valdoria with our very lives." "Lives, yes," Lady Catherine mused, taking a step closer to the captain. "But what of your pride, Captain Thornfield? What of your dignity?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. The courtiers behind Lady Catherine shifted nervously, some looking away as they sensed what was coming. Marcus had heard rumors of other officers being subjected to humiliating tests of loyalty, though he had hoped such stories were mere gossip born from the uncertainty of the transition period. Lady Catherine's eyes gleamed with a predatory light as she continued. "I have heard whispers, Captain. Whispers that suggest some members of the royal guard question my authority, that they pine for the old days, the old ways, the old rulers who can never return. Your ladyship, I can assure you that the royal guard serves the crown with unwavering—" "Kneel!" Lady Catherine commanded, her voice cutting through his words like a blade through silk. The single word struck Marcus like a physical blow. Around them, the air seemed to thicken with tension. The courtiers held their breath, and even the morning birds outside the windows fell silent, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Marcus stared at Lady Catherine, his mind racing. To kneel before the regent was not unusual in itself. Many formal ceremonies required such displays of respect. But this was different. This was a public humiliation, a breaking of a proud man's spirit for no reason other than to demonstrate absolute power. The request came not during a formal ceremony or recognition, but as a casual command, as one might order a servant to fetch wine. "Your ladyship," Marcus began carefully, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest, "I have knelt in service to the crown during coronations, oath ceremonies, and formal declarations. However, I am currently on duty, serving as guard to the Grand Hall as appointed by royal decree." Lady Catherine's smile widened, though her eyes grew colder still. "Are you refusing my command, Captain?" The words hung between them like a challenge thrown down in combat. Marcus could feel the weight of every choice he had ever made pressing down upon his shoulders. He thought of his father, who had served the previous king with honor until his dying day. He thought of his own son, training to join the royal guard, who looked up to him as an example of what it meant to serve with dignity and principle. "I am not refusing to serve your ladyship," Marcus replied, choosing his words with the precision of a master swordsman. "I am following the protocols established by centuries of tradition and royal decree." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Lady Catherine's face flushed with anger, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had expected immediate compliance, the kind of unquestioning obedience she had received from others who feared for their positions and their family's welfare. "Protocols," she hissed, her voice rising. "I am your protocol now, Captain Thornfield. I am your queen, your law, your very breath if I so choose. When I command you to kneel, you kneel. When I command you to crawl, you crawl. Do I make myself clear?" Marcus felt something break inside him, not his spirit, but rather the chains of blind obedience that he had never questioned until this moment. He had served faithfully, believing that loyalty to the crown meant protecting the kingdom and its people. But standing before Lady Catherine, seeing the cruel satisfaction in her eyes as she sought to break him for her own amusement, he realized that true loyalty sometimes meant standing up rather than kneeling down. "Your ladyship," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I swore an oath to protect the crown, the kingdom, and its people. That oath included a promise to uphold the honor and dignity of the royal guard. I cannot, in good conscience, participate in actions that serve no purpose other than humiliation." The silence that followed was deafening. The courtiers behind Lady Catherine looked terrified, some taking unconscious steps backward as if to distance themselves from the confrontation. Lady Catherine herself seemed momentarily stunned, as if she could not believe that anyone would dare defy her so openly. "You dare lecture me about oaths and honor?" she finally managed, her voice trembling with rage. "You forget yourself, Captain. You are nothing more than a servant, a tool to be used as I see fit." "Your honor means nothing if I say it means nothing." Marcus straightened his shoulders, and for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled, not with mockery or defiance, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his true path in a moment of trial. "With respect, your ladyship, you are mistaken. My honor is not yours to give or take. It was forged in 20 years of faithful service, tempered by sacrifice and dedication, and tested in moments when no one was watching. It belongs to me, and to the oath I swore not to any individual, but to the eternal principles of justice and protection that the crown represents." The words struck Lady Catherine like physical blows, each syllable challenging the very foundation of the power she had worked so hard to secure. Around them, the courtiers watched in fascination and terror as the drama unfolded, knowing they were witnessing something that would be whispered about in the corridors of power for years to come. Lady Catherine's face had gone pale, except for 2 spots of high color on her cheeks. Her breathing came in short, sharp bursts, and her hands shook with barely controlled fury. She had broken other men with similar displays of power, watching them crumble and beg for forgiveness. But Marcus Thornfield stood before her like an immovable mountain, weathered by storms, but unbroken. "This is treason," she whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the silent hall. "Open defiance of royal command is treason, punishable by death." Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of her words while showing no fear. "If standing for principle is treason, then I suppose I am a traitor, your ladyship. But I would rather die as an honorable traitor than live as a broken slave." The confrontation had reached a point of no return. Lady Catherine realized that backing down would be seen as weakness, while Marcus understood that his words had likely sealed his fate. Yet neither could retreat from the position they had taken, for to do so would mean betraying everything they believed themselves to be. "Guards!" Lady Catherine called out, her voice echoing through the hall. "Arrest this traitor!" But the other guards in the hall remained motionless, their faces masks of internal conflict. They had served alongside Marcus Thornfield, had seen his dedication and courage, had learned from his example what it meant to be a true guardian of the realm. To arrest him for refusing to kneel in humiliation felt wrong in ways that their hearts could not deny, even if their minds understood the consequences of disobedience. The standoff stretched on, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Lady Catherine's order hung unanswered, while Marcus stood calmly at his post, neither fleeing nor surrendering, but simply maintaining his dignity in the face of an impossible situation. Finally, one of the younger guards stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Begging your pardon, your ladyship," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Captain Thornfield is the ranking officer on duty. We cannot arrest him without proper charges and a formal hearing." Lady Catherine whirled on the young guard, her eyes blazing with fury. "Proper charges? I am giving you a direct order." "Yes, your ladyship," the guard replied, though he looked like he might faint at any moment. "But military protocol requires—" "Enough!" Lady Catherine's scream echoed through the hall like the cry of a wounded beast. She realized that her moment of triumph had turned into a public humiliation of her own, witnessed by courtiers who would spread the story throughout the kingdom before the day was done. Marcus watched her rage with something approaching pity. Power without wisdom, authority without compassion. These were the hallmarks of tyrants throughout history, and he recognized them clearly now in the woman who claimed to rule in the name of the crown he had served so faithfully. "This is not over, Captain Thornfield," Lady Catherine said finally, her voice low and deadly. "You have made a powerful enemy this day." "I have made no enemies, your ladyship," Marcus replied quietly. "I have simply chosen to remain true to the man I swore to be when I first put on this uniform." As Lady Catherine swept from the hall, her entourage trailing behind her like leaves caught in a hurricane, Marcus remained at his post. The other guards gradually returned to their duties, though they cast admiring glances at their captain when they thought no one was looking. The die had been cast, and there would be consequences. But as Marcus stood guard over the grand hall, feeling the weight of his ancestors' honor on his shoulders, he knew he had made the only choice a man of principle could make. The morning mist had burned away in the heat of confrontation, and the day stretched ahead filled with uncertainty and danger. But Captain Marcus Thornfield stood ready to face whatever came, his honor intact and his conscience clear, a living example of the truth that some things are worth more than comfort, safety, or even life itself. The bells of Valdoria Castle tolled the noon hour as Captain Marcus Thornfield made his way through the winding corridors toward the Royal Guard barracks. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread like wildfire through the castle, and he could feel the weight of curious stares and hushed whispers following his every step. Some faces showed admiration, others fear, and a few displayed the calculating look of those already considering which side would prove more profitable in the days to come. Marcus pushed open the heavy wooden door to the barracks common room and was greeted by an unusual silence. Normally, this time of day would find the off-duty guards sharing meals, playing cards, or engaging in the rough camaraderie that bound military brothers together. Instead, 24 pairs of eyes turned toward him with expressions ranging from awe to concern. Lieutenant Samuel Morrison, Marcus's second-in-command and closest friend within the Guard, rose from his seat at the central table. Sam had served under Marcus for 8 years, had fought beside him during the border skirmishes with the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, and had never known his captain to make a decision that wasn't carefully considered and morally sound. "Captain," Sam said formally, though his weathered face showed deep concern, "the men have been discussing the events of this morning." Marcus nodded, understanding the delicate position his actions had placed his subordinates in. These were good men, loyal soldiers who had families to feed and futures to consider. They respected him, but they also lived in a world where defying the regent could mean imprisonment, exile, or worse. "Speak freely, Sam. What are the men saying?" A young corporal named Thomas Fletcher, barely 20 years old and new to the Guard, stood up abruptly. His face was flushed with the righteous anger of youth, and his eyes burned with idealistic fire. "They're saying you're a hero, sir," Thomas declared, his voice carrying across the room. "Finally, someone had the courage to stand up to that, to her tyranny." Several older guards shifted uncomfortably at the young man's boldness. Sergeant William Hayes, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, cleared his throat meaningfully. "Begging your pardon, Corporal Fletcher, but heroism doesn't put food on the table or keep our families safe," Hayes said gruffly. "We all respect the captain, but we've got to think practical like—" Marcus appreciated Hayes's honesty. The sergeant had a wife and 3 daughters to support, and his pension was only 5 years away. It would be unfair to expect such a man to risk everything for a matter of principle, no matter how important that principle might be. "Sergeant Hayes speaks truly," Marcus said, addressing the entire room. "What happened this morning will have consequences, and I won't ask any of you to share them. You swore oaths to serve the crown, not to follow me into whatever storm is coming." A voice from the back of the room spoke up. It belonged to Corporal David Chen, a quiet man known for his skill with a crossbow and his unwavering reliability. "But what is the crown, Captain? Is it just whoever sits on the throne, or is it something more?" The question hung in the air like incense in a chapel, heavy with meaning and possibility. Marcus had wrestled with the same question throughout the morning, trying to reconcile his duty to obey with his duty to uphold the values that the crown was supposed to represent. "The crown," Marcus said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "is an institution built on principles that are larger than any individual who might wear it temporarily. Justice, protection of the innocent, service to the people. These are the true foundations of royal authority." Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward, his intelligent eyes studying his captain's face. "And when the person wearing the crown betrays those principles?" Before Marcus could answer, the barracks door burst open with enough force to slam it against the stone wall. Lady Catherine herself strode into the room, flanked by 6 guards, wearing the black and silver livery of her personal retinue, men who had been recruited from outside the kingdom and owed their loyalty directly to her rather than to Valdorian tradition. The royal guards leaped to their feet in unison, years of training taking over despite the unusual circumstances. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Lady Catherine and his men, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "Your ladyship," Marcus said formally, "to what do we owe the honor of this visit?" Lady Catherine's green eyes swept the room like a predator surveying potential prey. She had changed from her morning gown into a military-style outfit of deep blue velvet with silver trim, clearly intended to emphasize her authority over the armed forces. The diamond tiara had been replaced by a circlet of silver that seemed to glitter with malevolent purpose. "I come to address the cancer that has infected the Royal Guard," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "It has come to my attention that certain members of this organization have forgotten their place and their purpose." Marcus felt the tension in the room ratchet up several degrees. Behind Lady Catherine, her personal guard stood with hands on weapons, ready to respond to any threat real or imagined. His own men remained at attention, but he could sense their nervous energy like electricity before a storm. "The Royal Guard serves the Crown faithfully, Your Ladyship," Marcus replied evenly, "as we have for over 3 centuries. Lady Catherine's laugh was sharp and cold. "Faithfully? Is that what you call open defiance of royal commands? Is that what you call spreading sedition among the ranks?" She stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume and see the carefully applied cosmetics that couldn't quite hide the lines of stress around her eyes. Power might corrupt, but it also consumed, and Lady Catherine showed signs of both processes. "I did not spread sedition, Your Ladyship. I simply refused to participate in meaningless humiliation." "Meaningless?" Lady Catherine's voice rose to a near shriek. "Testing the loyalty of my subordinates is meaningless? Ensuring absolute obedience is meaningless?" Marcus held her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by her proximity or her fury. "Loyalty cannot be tested through degradation, Your Ladyship. True loyalty is earned through just leadership and mutual respect." The slap came so fast that even Marcus's trained reflexes couldn't dodge it entirely. Lady Catherine's jeweled hand caught him across the cheek with enough force to snap his head to one side and leave a burning line of pain across his skin. The sound echoed through the barracks like a gunshot. For a moment, absolute silence reigned. Then, almost as one, every member of the Royal Guard took a step forward, their faces dark with anger at seeing their beloved captain struck like a common criminal. The movement was instinctive, protective, and unmistakably threatening. Lady Catherine's personal guards immediately drew their weapons, the ring of steel filling the air. Her own face had gone pale as she realized that her moment of uncontrolled anger had nearly sparked an armed confrontation in which she would be vastly outnumbered. Marcus raised his hand, stopping his men's advance with a gesture that spoke to years of absolute trust and respect. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth where Lady Catherine's rings had cut his lip, but his voice remained calm and steady. "Stand down," he commanded quietly. "All of you." Reluctantly, the Royal Guard stepped back, though their eyes never left Lady Catherine's face. The regent's own men kept their weapons drawn, clearly uncertain about how to proceed in such a volatile situation. Marcus turned back to Lady Catherine, and she saw something in his eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't anger or hatred, but rather a kind of cold determination that was far more dangerous than mere emotion. "You have made your point, Your Ladyship," Marcus said softly. "You have power, and you are willing to use it arbitrarily. The question now becomes, what do you intend to do with that power?" Lady Catherine struggled to regain her composure, knowing that every eye in the room was watching her reaction. She had come here to break Marcus Thornfield's spirit and demonstrate her absolute authority over the military forces of the kingdom. Instead, she found herself facing a man who seemed to grow stronger with each humiliation heaped upon him. "What I intend," she said, forcing her voice back to its usual commanding tone, "is to remind everyone present that I am the regent of this kingdom. My word is law. My will is absolute, and my authority is not subject to debate or interpretation." She gestured to her personal guards. Captain Marcus Thornfield, you are hereby relieved of your command and confined to quarters pending a formal investigation into charges of treason, sedition, and insubordination. Marcus nodded calmly, as if he had expected this outcome. He began unbuckling his ceremonial sword, the blade that had been presented to him by the previous king in recognition of his faithful service. The sound of the leather straps seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Captain," Lieutenant Morrison said urgently, "this is illegal. Military law requires formal charges to be filed before—" "Lieutenant Morrison, you will hold your tongue," Lady Catherine snapped, "or join your captain in confinement." Marcus handed his sword to Sam, their eyes meeting for a moment in silent communication. "Follow the law, Sam. Always follow the law, even when others choose not to." As Lady Catherine's guards moved to escort Marcus from the barracks, Corporal Fletcher suddenly spoke up, his young voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone present. "If you're taking Captain Thornfield, you'll have to take me too." Lady Catherine whirled to face the young soldier, her eyes blazing with fury. "What did you say?" Fletcher stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "I said you'll have to take me too, your ladyship. If supporting Captain Thornfield makes me a traitor, then I'm a traitor." To everyone's amazement, Corporal Chen moved to stand beside Fletcher. Then Sergeant Hayes, despite his earlier practical concerns, joined them. One by one, every member of the Royal Guard present stepped forward, forming a solid wall of blue and silver uniforms behind their captain. Lady Catherine stared at the unprecedented display of loyalty with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Her personal guards looked nervous, clearly recognizing that they were outnumbered by experienced soldiers who knew every inch of the castle and every secret passage within its walls. "This is mutiny," she whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the absolute silence. "This is open rebellion against the crown." Marcus felt a surge of pride in his men that almost overwhelmed him. These brave souls were risking everything, their careers, their futures, their very lives, to stand with him against injustice. Yet he also recognized the terrible position his principles had placed them in. "Your ladyship," Marcus said formally, "these men are not in rebellion. They are simply demonstrating the same loyalty to principle that has made the Royal Guard the most respected military force in the known world. If you wish to punish someone for the events of this day, punish me alone." Lady Catherine's face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling into a pale, dangerous calm. She had come here expecting to break one man, and instead found herself facing the united opposition of the entire Royal Guard. Every political instinct she possessed warned her that pushing this confrontation further could result in open warfare within the castle walls. "Very well," she said finally, her voice dripping with false reasonableness. "I can see that Captain Thornfield's infection has spread further than anticipated. Perhaps time in the dungeons will help all of you remember where your true loyalties should lie." She turned to her personal guards. "Arrest them all. Every last one." But even as the words left her mouth, Lady Catherine knew she had made a critical error. Her 6 personal guards, no matter how loyal or well-trained, could not hope to arrest 24 elite soldiers in their own stronghold. The Royal Guards had not drawn their weapons, but their stance and positioning made it clear that any attempt at mass arrests would meet with immediate and overwhelming resistance. The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to make the first move that would turn political confrontation into actual violence. Lady Catherine's authority demanded that her orders be obeyed, but practical reality made such obedience impossible without a bloodbath that would likely see her own forces overwhelmed. Finally, Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward, his diplomatic skills coming to the fore in a moment of crisis. "Your ladyship," he said respectfully, "perhaps we could arrange a compromise that serves both honor and practical necessity." Lady Catherine turned her cold gaze on him, but desperation made her willing to listen. Speak. Allow Captain Thornfield to remain in quarters, as ordered, but under house arrest rather than dungeon confinement. The rest of us will return to our duties while formal charges are prepared through proper military channels. It wasn't much of a compromise, but it offered Lady Catherine a way to save face while avoiding immediate bloodshed. She studied the faces around her, reading the determination and loyalty that bound these soldiers together, and realized that she had underestimated both Marcus Thornfield's influence and the principles that guided the royal guard. "Very well," she said through gritted teeth, "but understand this, all of you. What happened here today has been witnessed and recorded. Your futures, your family's welfare, your very lives now depend on absolute compliance with my authority going forward." As she swept from the barracks with her guards, Lady Catherine's mind was already working on longer-term solutions to the problem these soldiers represented. If she couldn't break them through direct confrontation, perhaps there were other methods, more subtle, more personal, and ultimately more devastating. Marcus watched her go, understanding that this was merely the first battle in a war that would determine not just his own fate, but the very soul of the kingdom he had sworn to protect. The die was cast, alliances were forming, and the peaceful transition of power that everyone had hoped for was becoming impossible. But as he looked around at the loyal faces of his men, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the old king's death: hope. Evil might wear the crown for a time, but as long as good men stood together in defense of principle, tyranny would never be absolute. The real fight was just beginning. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the Royal Guard barracks, and Captain Marcus Thornfield sat in his quarters watching the autumn rain streak down the narrow windows of his chambers. The rooms that had once felt like a comfortable retreat now served as his prison, though the locks were more political than physical. Lady Catherine had been true to her word about house arrest, but Marcus understood that his true confinement lay in the impossible situation she had created for him and his loyal men. A soft knock at his door broke the afternoon silence. "Enter," Marcus called, expecting to see the young guard who brought his meals twice daily. Instead, Lieutenant Morrison slipped quietly into the room, his face grave with worry and exhaustion. Sam looked as though he hadn't slept properly since the confrontation, and Marcus felt a pang of guilt for the burden his principles had placed on his friend's shoulders. "Sam," Marcus said, rising from his chair by the window, "you shouldn't be here. Lady Catherine made it clear that contact with me could be seen as continued sedition." Morrison waved away the concern with a gesture that spoke to 20 years of friendship. "Let her try to arrest the entire kingdom, Marcus. We need to talk." The lieutenant moved to the center of the room, checking the walls and corners with the practiced eye of a man who had learned not to trust even familiar spaces. Satisfied that they were alone, he pulled a letter from inside his uniform jacket. "This arrived by courier an hour ago," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's from Sir Edmund Blackwood." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat at the name. Sir Edmund had been the previous king's most trusted advisor, a man of impeccable honor and wisdom who had withdrawn from court life following the king's death. If Sir Edmund was reaching out now, it meant that word of recent events had spread beyond the castle walls. Marcus took the letter with hands that trembled slightly, breaking the familiar wax seal that bore Sir Edmund's personal crest. The parchment crackled as he unfolded it, and he could almost hear the old knight's cultured voice in the carefully chosen words. "My dear Captain Thornfield," the letter began, "word has reached me of your recent stand against tyranny, and I write to you with both admiration and grave concern. Your actions have awakened hope in many hearts throughout the kingdom, but they have also exposed a truth that some of us have suspected for months. Lady Catherine's appointment as regent was not the dying king's decision, but rather the result of forged documents and political manipulation. Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet as he read those words. He had suspected that something was wrong with the transition of power, but to have it confirmed by someone as trustworthy as Sir Edmund was both validating and terrifying. The letter continued. I have been gathering evidence of the deception, but Lady Catherine's supporters control most official channels of communication. Your refusal to kneel may seem like a small gesture to some, but it has become a symbol of resistance that grows stronger each day. People are beginning to ask questions, to demand answers, to remember what true leadership looks like. Marcus looked up at Sam, who was watching his captain's face with intense curiosity. Edmund believes the regency is illegitimate, Marcus said quietly. The king never appointed Lady Catherine as regent. Morrison's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with understanding. That would explain her desperate need to break you publicly. She knows that doubt is spreading, and your example threatens everything she's built. Marcus returned to the letter, reading Sir Edmund's final paragraphs with growing concern. I must warn you, dear friend, that Lady Catherine has sent agents to arrest your son James at his training academy. She intends to use him as leverage against you, forcing you to publicly apologize and submit to her authority in exchange for his safety. The boy is brave like his father, but he is also young and vulnerable. The letter fell from Marcus's numb fingers as the full horror of the situation struck him. James was only 17, bright and eager and full of dreams of serving with the same honor his father had demonstrated. The thought of his son suffering for his principles was almost more than Marcus could bear. What is it? Sam asked urgently. Marcus, what's wrong? Marcus bent to retrieve the letter, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. She has James, or she's trying to get him. She's going to use my son against me. Morrison's face darkened with anger. That's despicable, even for her, using a child as a political weapon. Not a child, Marcus said grimly. A young man who made the mistake of being born to a father who couldn't keep his mouth shut when he should have knelt. The two men stood in heavy silence for a moment, both understanding the terrible calculus that Lady Catherine had introduced to their conflict. Personal honor was one thing when the cost was borne by the person making the choice, but asking a father to watch his child suffer for the sake of principle was something else entirely. Another knock at the door made both men freeze. This time the sound was more insistent, more official. Sam quickly moved to the window alcove, positioning himself where he couldn't be seen from the doorway. Captain Thornfield, came a voice from the corridor. Lady Catherine requires your immediate presence in the throne room. Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his appearance in the small mirror above his wash basin. Whatever was coming, he would meet it with dignity intact. I'll be right there, he called. As he moved toward the door, Sam caught his arm. Whatever she offers, whatever she threatens, remember that James is stronger than she thinks. Your son has your blood, Your Honor. Don't give up everything you've fought for because she's holding him hostage. Marcus nodded, though his heart was already breaking at the thought of his son in danger. If something happens to me, Sam, make sure the truth gets out. Sir Edmund, the other nobles, the people, they need to know what's really happening here. The throne room of Valdoria Castle was a magnificent chamber designed to intimidate and inspire in equal measure. Soaring columns of white marble supported a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of historical victories, while stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor. At the far end of the room, the ancient throne of Valdorian kings sat upon a raised dais, its carved dragons and flowing script speaking to centuries of tradition and legitimate authority. Lady Catherine sat upon that throne now, but somehow her presence diminished rather than enhanced its majesty. She wore a gown of deep purple silk with cloth of gold trim, and the crown of Valdoria rested upon her head, though Marcus noticed that it seemed too large for her, requiring careful positioning to keep it from sliding down over her eyes. Arranged before the throne were perhaps 50 courtiers, nobles, and officials, all carefully chosen for their support of the current regime or their fear of opposing it. Marcus recognized many faces, some friendly and some hostile, but all wearing expressions of nervous anticipation as they waited to see how this final confrontation would unfold. "Captain Marcus Thornfield," Lady Catherine announced as he entered the chamber, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast space. "You stand accused of treason, sedition, and willful disobedience to royal authority. How do you answer these charges?" Marcus walked slowly down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the hushed chamber. He had walked this path many times before, but always as a loyal protector approaching his king with reports or requests. Now he came as an accused traitor, yet somehow he felt more at peace than he had in months. "I answer that I have served the true interests of the crown for 20 years, your ladyship, and that I continue to do so today." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd at his calm response. Lady Catherine leaned forward on the throne, her eyes glittering with anticipation. "The true interests of the crown are determined by its rightful ruler," she said smoothly. "And I am that ruler. Your refusal to acknowledge my authority makes you a traitor to the realm." "With respect, your ladyship," Marcus replied, "authority without legitimacy is simply tyranny with better clothes." The murmur from the crowd grew louder, and several of Lady Catherine's supporters looked shocked at such bold words spoken in the throne room itself. But Marcus was past caring about political niceties or diplomatic language. If this was to be his final stand, he would make it count. Lady Catherine's face flushed with anger, but she forced herself to smile. "Legitimacy. I was appointed regent by the dying king himself, witnessed by the proper authorities, and confirmed by royal decree." "Sir Edmund Blackwood would dispute that claim," Marcus said quietly. The reaction to those words was immediate and dramatic. Several nobles gasped in shock, others looked confused, and Lady Catherine herself went pale beneath her carefully applied cosmetics. The name of Sir Edmund carried tremendous weight throughout the kingdom, and his reputation for honesty and integrity was unquestioned. "Sir Edmund is an old man whose mind has been affected by grief and age," Lady Catherine said quickly, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "His opinions carry no legal weight." "Perhaps not," Marcus agreed. "But truth has a way of surfacing eventually, regardless of how deeply it's buried." Lady Catherine realized that the conversation was spiraling beyond her control. She had intended this to be a simple demonstration of power, with Marcus either submitting publicly or being executed as an example to others. Instead, he was raising questions about her very right to rule, questions that could destroy everything she had worked to achieve. "Enough!" she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You want to discuss truth? Let me show you a truth that will bring you to your knees faster than any command." She gestured to her personal guards, and they stepped aside to reveal a figure that made Marcus's blood turn to ice in his veins. James Thornfield stood between two of Lady Catherine's agents, his young face pale but defiant, his training academy uniform torn and dirty from rough handling. "Father," James said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "I'm sorry. They said you needed me here." Marcus felt his world narrow to a single point of anguish and rage. His son, his bright, brave, innocent son, stood as a pawn in a game that should never have involved him. Every protective instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to give Lady Catherine whatever she wanted, to kneel and grovel and beg if necessary to secure his child's safety. "Now," Lady Catherine said, her confidence returning as she saw the effect her gambit had produced. Let us discuss the terms of your surrender. You will publicly apologize for your seditious behavior, swear renewed loyalty to my authority, and serve as an example to others who might be tempted to follow your path of rebellion." Marcus stared at his son, seeing so much of himself in the young man's bearing. James stood straight despite his circumstances, meeting his father's eyes without shame or pleading, and in that moment, Marcus realized that his son already understood what was at stake. "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Lady Catherine's smile was cold and triumphant. "Then young James will face the consequences of his father's treasonous choices. I'm sure you can imagine what those consequences might be." The throne room fell silent as everyone present understood the terrible choice being forced upon Captain Thornfield. Honor or family, principle or love, the good of the kingdom or the safety of his son. These were the weights being balanced on the scales of a father's heart. Marcus looked around the chamber, seeing the mixture of sympathy, fear, and calculation on the faces surrounding him. Then his eyes returned to James, and he saw something that gave him strength. His son was shaking his head slightly, a barely perceptible movement that spoke volumes about the young man's character. "I have a counter-proposal, your ladyship," Marcus said, his voice carrying a strength that surprised even himself. Lady Catherine's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You are hardly in a position to make demands, Captain." "Not demands," Marcus replied. "Truth." He turned to address the entire assemblage, his voice rising to fill every corner of the vast chamber. 3 days ago, I refused to kneel before Lady Catherine, not out of disrespect for legitimate authority, but because I recognized that what was being demanded was not respect, but degradation. Today I stand before you as a father whose child has been threatened, as a soldier whose honor has been questioned, and as a citizen whose kingdom has been stolen." The murmur from the crowd was growing into a roar of shocked voices. Several nobles were looking at each other with new understanding, while Lady Catherine's supporters seemed confused and uncertain. "Sir Edmund Blackwood has evidence that the regency was established through forged documents," Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "The king never appointed Lady Catherine as regent. We have been ruled by a usurper who maintains power through fear and manipulation." "Silence!" Lady Catherine screamed, leaping to her feet. The crown slipped sideways on her head, making her look more like a child playing dress-up than a legitimate ruler. "Guards! Arrest this traitor immediately!" But something had changed in the chamber. The revelation about Sir Edmund's evidence, combined with Marcus's obvious willingness to sacrifice everything for truth, had shifted the balance of power in subtle but crucial ways. Several of Lady Catherine's own guards hesitated, looking uncertain about their duty in the face of such serious accusations. James Thornfield suddenly spoke, his young voice carrying clearly in the chaos. "She's lying about everything, Father, even about arresting me. I came here voluntarily when they said you needed me. I won't be used as a weapon against honor." The young man pulled free from his captor's loosened grips and walked calmly to stand beside his father. The gesture was simple but profound, a son choosing to share his father's fate rather than be used to compromise his principles. Lady Catherine stared at the two Thornfields standing together, father and son united in their willingness to face whatever consequences might come. Around them, the assembled nobles and courtiers were beginning to whisper among themselves, and she could see doubt spreading through their ranks like cracks in a foundation. "You fools!" she hissed. "You think honor will protect you? You think principle will feed your families or keep your heads on your shoulders?" "We think," Marcus said quietly, "that a kingdom built on lies and maintained through fear is not worth preserving. And we believe that sometimes standing for truth is more important than survival." The words struck the assembly like a physical blow. In that moment, everyone present understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A man choosing principle over pragmatism, honor over safety, truth over comfort. It was the kind of moment that defined not just individual character, but the character of entire civilizations. One by one, nobles began to step forward, moving to stand behind Marcus and James. First came Lord William Ashworth, an elderly man who had served the previous king faithfully for 40 years. Then, Lady Margaret Cornwall, whose moral authority was recognized throughout the kingdom. Others followed, until nearly half the assembly stood with the Thornfields. Lady Catherine watched her support crumble with growing desperation. "This is treason!" she screamed. "All of you, treason against the crown!" "The crown serves the people," Lord Ashworth said firmly. "When it ceases to do so, it ceases to be legitimate." As if summoned by those words, the great doors of the throne room opened to admit Sir Edmund Blackwood himself. The old knight walked slowly but purposefully down the center aisle, his presence immediately commanding the attention and respect of everyone present. Behind him came several other nobles who had withdrawn from court life following the king's death, all now returning to support the cause of truth. Sir Edmund stopped before the throne and looked up at Lady Catherine with eyes that had seen decades of royal service. "Your ladyship," he said formally, "I call upon you to surrender the throne and crown you have stolen, and to face judgment for your crimes against the kingdom and its people." The demand hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Lady Catherine looked around the chamber, seeing her support evaporating before her eyes, understanding that her careful plans had collapsed in the face of one man's refusal to kneel in humiliation. But even as defeat stared her in the face, Lady Catherine's pride would not allow her to surrender gracefully. "I am the regent," she declared, though her voice now carried more desperation than authority. "I will not be removed by traitors and malcontents." She gestured frantically to her remaining guards, but even they seemed uncertain now, caught between conflicting loyalties and faced with overwhelming opposition from the legitimate nobility of the kingdom. The revolution that followed was swift and surprisingly bloodless. Lady Catherine's remaining supporters, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly abandoned their allegiance to preserve their own positions. The false regent herself was escorted from the throne room with what dignity could be salvaged, though the crown of Valdoria remained behind, waiting for its rightful recipient. As the immediate crisis passed and the chamber gradually emptied, Marcus found himself alone with his son in the vast space where it had all begun. James stood quietly beside his father, both of them still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Father," James said finally, "was it worth it? Standing up to her, risking everything we had?" Marcus considered the question carefully, thinking about all that had been lost and gained in the past few days. He had risked his career, his safety, his son's welfare, and potentially his life for the sake of refusing to kneel in humiliation. Yet in doing so, he had helped expose a fundamental fraud at the heart of the kingdom's government and had played a crucial role in restoring legitimate authority. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that there are some things worth more than safety or comfort or even life itself. Truth, honor, the courage to stand for what's right even when it's dangerous. These are the things that separate civilization from chaos, that make life worth living." James nodded thoughtfully, then smiled with the kind of understanding that comes only to those who have been tested by fire and found themselves equal to the challenge. "Then I'm proud to be your son, Father. And I'm proud that when the moment came to choose between kneeling and standing, you chose to stand." As father and son walked together from the throne room toward an uncertain but hopeful future, the autumn sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, sending shafts of golden light through the stained glass windows to illuminate the ancient stones of Valdoria Castle. The kingdom had been shaken, its foundations tested, but it would endure, strengthened by the courage of those who refused to kneel when kneeling meant abandoning everything they held sacred. In the days that followed, songs would be written about Captain Marcus Thornfield and his refusal to kneel. Children would learn his story as an example of moral courage, and historians would mark the confrontation as a turning point in the kingdom's development toward a more just and honorable society. But Marcus himself remained focused on simpler things, serving his kingdom with honor, raising his son to be a man of principle, and never forgetting that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with swords or armies, but with the simple courage to stand upright when others demand that you fall to your knees.